Welcome to the Supply Chain Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Sheri Hinish, also called the Supply Chain Queen, and we have an incredible Student Voices episode planned today with Marissa Theodorou, who's going to talk with us about all the things around sustainability. When does it become more credible with the right level of capital allocation, governance, operations, and how that enables the underpinning foundational supply chain to do what it's supposed to do. Welcome, Marissa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Sheri. Very excited to be on the podcast.
Amazing. And so before we kick off, why don't we start with an origin story intro? Tell folks a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and I'm originally from Australia, where I've got my business, which I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit later. But that spans financial advice. And then most recently, moving to the Netherlands, I have experience in supply chain. And throughout both of those, and even throughout my personal experience, I've always looked at how I can make the most positive impact with the amount of time that we've got on this earth. So that's always been my guiding principle.
We love it.
Throughout my personal and professional life. So yeah, kind of my North Star.
That's amazing. And so you, in your career background, you've worked at an interesting intersection underpinned by supply chain, finance, sustainability, ESG strategy. And so that combination, although it might seem intuitive for people like us, because I have a similar background, how does that show up in the way that you think about impact and how connecting these conversations actually makes the world a better place, which might not feel intuitive to people who don't see that connection?
I think that is a really important point that you make, because it's really shown me that you can come from different backgrounds. You can work in finance, in supply chain, in governance, in operations, HR, in products or services, and really in whatever team or whatever role, and still find a way to have impact and still find a way to sort of navigate through your job or through your job description and find, okay, well, where are the sustainability sort of initiatives that I can get across? You don't need to have the word sustainability or ESG in your job description. You can really find a way to influence a company through any sort of title or role or team.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Those words that you've just used and unpacked for people, it might not necessarily be in the title of the role, but it's within the scope of the role.
Yeah.
And so you have elements of sustainability and technology that are automatic no matter what your job is in supply chain. Everyone needs to know about supply chain finance.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's a good transition into what did moving from Australia to Amsterdam for your graduate education change about how you understood sustainability and then within the larger global business construct?
Yeah, so it changed more than I even thought it would. So I knew moving abroad and pursuing further studies would obviously put me outside my comfort zone. I would learn new things, but yeah, I don't think I was prepared for how much I would learn. So to touch on the Amsterdam, I think was rated the most sustainable city in the world.
Yeah.
They have so many green initiatives, ranging from small things, even like people ride their bike to work. And it's such a great way to be outside in the fresh air, get some exercise in. Obviously, no emissions there with the cars. So having a lot of circular closed loop systems ingrained into daily behaviors, it really showed me how powerful system design is. And to do it from the start, you can really see that Amsterdam was built with intention. And then with the masters as well, it gave me the language that I was looking for and the theory to understand what I was already experiencing personally.
I love that.
And it shifted my thinking as well, thinking more like an economist, because I did a master's of economics. And kind of a realization I had was that sustainability is about good intentions, but it's more about incentives. So yeah, both moving here personally and then also theoretically through the masters, it helped me to connect the dots a little bit and to ask a few more sort of critical questions.
Yeah, I love that framing, and that you start to, it's like the more you learn, the more questions you have.
Agree. Yes, I thought I
And
had it all solved, but no, came out with more
yeah,
questions.
Yeah, and there's a quote that I picked up early in my career by Deming, who is the grandfather of modern quality management systems. And it was every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. And so what you've just described, I think, one of the beautiful things is that when you have people who are passionate about the topics and who want to make a difference, like that's incredibly important. When you mentioned strategy and earlier in the conversation, governance. And for folks who are listening who may not understand the point of governance, I think we're going to get to that. But what is it like building this sort of credibility and leadership as a young woman in industries where leadership looks very different than us on screen?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I started my career in my early 20s. I think I was 20 when I started in financial advice. So I was pretty young and I was often walking into rooms where I was the youngest person and also often the only female. So in terms of building credibility as a young woman in a male-dominated industry, it really forced me to find my voice quite quickly, learn how to communicate clearly, and to speak up as well, because your voice, everyone's voice, is valuable. But yeah, I think what's encouraging is that I found it quite motivating being a young female in a male-dominated industry. I think when I would look around, I remember sitting in a boardroom and thinking, well, if I wasn't here, then no females would be represented in this room. So I found that quite motivating. And I'm glad I stuck through it, and I'm glad I pursued the career because it's been fulfilling, and I hope it's fulfilling in the future as well. And yeah, I hope it sort of paves the way for more young females to come into this space.
Right, but you had courage to be in those rooms and to show up and
Yeah.
use your voice in ways with agency and feel empowered that you had meaningful contributions, but you had to show up and be present and use the space differently, right?
Yeah, and back yourself. I think, yeah, be confident, and just own it.
I love it. So now let's talk about supply chain as an operational reality. You've also had some experience working for a large CPG brand, Kraft Heinz, and you've turned some of those hard-earned lessons into what you're doing as a co-founder for your own business. So what did working on a global supply chain in all its complexities, wins and losses, teach you about ESG or sustainability conversations that sometimes miss the mark?
It was very eye-opening. I think the biggest thing I would say is how nuanced the problems are. I think walking into it, especially from maybe a finance background, you can sort of look at an investment or a fund and you can apply similar due diligence. But at Kraft Heinz and at a global fast-moving consumer goods company, yeah, there's a lot of nuances. Context is everything. And especially when you're dealing with a product, I just found it so interesting how things change so much compared to services. Services, I think, are a little bit more easier to digest and adopt, whereas, yeah, products are so different. So I think it taught me that sustainability is not a copy and paste method, and you really need to understand fully the context and the systems that you're operating in, work within the constraints and just improve from there.
So that's interesting. Working within the constraints and because continuous improvement isn't always the answer.
Yeah, correct. You can't strive for perfection either as well. I was in a global team, so I worked with almost every team and every market that Kraft Heinz operated in globally. I won't mention the market or the team, but the one that I worked closely with, there was a range of challenges that needed to be solved. And I think just focusing on one at a time, because even if you improve 1% on something, say if it's governance, 1% means, millions, sometimes even billions of dollars or units. So I think taking it slow and just realizing that every small little change you make really does have a massive impact.
Yeah, that's an incredible insight, I think. With what's going on in the world right now, everyone can relate to that. Can you give 1-2% more? And that compounded and
Correct.
cumulatively can actually be an incredible competitive advantage, and it can demonstrate impact in the space. And that's also part of what you brought into your own startup. And so let's talk a little bit about your firm and its founding logic, because I know you and your co-founder, you built some advice around this model, including answering the question, is there a gap in the market for this marriage of finance, sustainability, and supply chain? And just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the short version of what Unless Financial does is that we are a financial advice firm based in Australia, and we give advice, and we do basically streamlining it into two camps. So we offer strategic investment advice to mainly right now our target market is pre-retirement or retirement age. And then further to that, we also offer investment advice, specializing in ethical and impact investments. And so there were a few gaps that led us to building Unless. I would say the biggest was that most advice firms we found in Australia seemed to sit in one of two camps. Either they were very traditional, so investing in the usual big banks, mining, energy, big supermarket chains. Or the second one would be that they had an ethical option, but it mostly focused on screening out the harm. And so through our research before building the company, we found that there was 88% of Australians wanting impact-focused advice, and only, less than 1% of advisors specialize in impact investing in Australia. So that's why Unless was built to fill that gap, and to go even further than just the ethical ESG responsible investing recommendations. We really strive to find the investments that have the most impact and to create real meaningful change, not just divesting and avoiding harm.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And so let's talk about why finance is still the biggest underused lever in circularity and how that relates to climate transition and regeneration.
Yeah, it's honestly fascinating how it is the most underused lever, because it's the most powerful lever we have. If I were to think as to why finance is still being underused, I think it's honestly still the perception that if you invest in circularity or through an impact lens, you're sacrificing financial returns. I think that is still the misconception that carries through to today, when that is definitely not the case, time and time again. I would also say in finance, a big reason as to why it's being underused is people don't know really where to go and who to invest in, and what is real, what is greenwashing, what is going to give them a return based on their risk profile. So I would say that's also where, financial advice and good financial advice comes into the mix, because, for instance, at Unless Financial, do the due diligence, and we have access to these reports and to these fund managers. And so we're able to steer our clients into the right meaningful investments in order to drive circularity.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's Unless, UNLESS, for folks who are listening who haven't caught that yet. And so let's close and wrap up on a really fundamental question. What happens when finance and operations and supply chain work in parallel to reinforce each other? What happens when we are aligned around long-term impact? What happens to the economy? What do you see in the future in 2030?
I think the crucial word there is long term. You need to be thinking in the long term, not short term thinking. But I think what we see in the economy in 2030 is a world that is a lot more efficient and a lot less wasteful. We stop relying on the short-term model and the short-term thinking of overproduction. And once we have those long-term goals in mind, we're able to actually design products and systems more intentionally. And then it just becomes a positive feedback loop when
Right.
you're able to create intentional products and services that are good for the planet, but then also financially serving your business as well. It starts reinforcing better outcomes over time, and then the capital just starts to flow into those circular models as well. So, yeah, I think we see a very efficient and less wasteful world in 2030.
Amazing. Marissa, it's been such a pleasure to host you. How can folks get in touch, learn more, and continue the conversation with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can check out our website, unless.financial. We do only give advice to Australians, so if you are in Australia, feel free to reach out. You can also, if you're outside of Australia but still want to keep in touch, you can sign on to our monthly newsletter called Ripple Effects. It's a great way to stay engaged on monthly impact insights.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Marissa, for joining.
Thank you,
Everyone, make sure you go check out the links. We're going to make sure that we share them in the comments below. And thank you for all that you do, Marissa, to
Sheri.
create long-term impact in finance, capital flows, and supply chains.
Yes, thanks, Sheri. Thanks for having me.